Transmission report.
Have you been online and seen complaints about the newest superhero movie or sci-fi TV show being called too woke? Well, lucky you, that is the exact topic we're covering today. Welcome to A Glitch in the Matrix, our podcast where we will be discussing the glitch in our world. We have an assortment of castmates and travelers in these sci-fi worlds with us. I'm Abby Van Zee.
Mar Walker.
Jack Snyder.
Jasmine Glover.
For our project, we examined the woke label in sci-fi worlds and discussed how these two things connect with each other. But to understand how they connect, first we need to discuss both ideas separately. Most people have an idea of what sci-fi is. From Star Trek to Star Wars, sci-fi is self-explanatory. It's a science fiction world where most of the differentiation from reality is through the impact of science or science-based topics. Woke is a term that's harder to define. Woke, in this context, is where someone or something is seen as progressive or liberal, even to what some people see as an absurd and unreasonable extreme. With those differentiations in mind, how does that tie back to people calling sci-fi woke? Well, we have an acronym for that. Named after a vehicle from a very specific piece of sci-fi media, while it usually stands for something else, for us, AT stands for Artifact Themes equal Audience Triggers. Artifact themes are concepts and examples of sci-fi media which directly causes the audience to, quote, get triggered and deposit the woke label onto it. We've sorted these AT into 7 categories, which, in turn, we will explain and then all come together to discuss how these AT impact us all. Up first with AT number 1 is Mar.
Our first artifact theme is gender roles and audience trigger. Audience trigger is any time there is a challenge of gender roles or gender itself. Historically, traditional gender roles have been a societal norm in our country as well as across the globe. Those gender norms have been challenged in the 21st century and in history. We visited the America 250 exhibit in Peoria's Riverfront Museum and found an early example of pushback against traditional gender roles was by Abigail Adams, the wife of our second president, John Adams. In the spring of 1776, while he was attending the Second Continental Congress, she wrote a letter to him saying, "Remember the ladies," while drafting the Declaration of Independence, asking for legal reforms that would grant women atonement from their husbands and fathers. A direct example of challenging gender roles. Today, we still see that pushback. In the graphic novel written by Tom King, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, the people Supergirl meet constantly categorize her as a lesser version of Superman because she is a woman. This happens in Chapter 1 during a bar fight, which she wins even while drunk, as well as in Chapter 2, where Ruthie, the narrator and Supergirl's companion, says, and I quote, "Throughout the months of our travel, these types of encounters were not infrequent." And she goes on to say, naturally being the pusillanimous types, for who else has such troubles they hesitated in seeking direct retribution on Man of Steel. However, when they came up on his distaffed cousin, their chests puffed up with eagerly renewed pluck. They assumed her to be his soft underbelly. Jack joins us with AT number 2.
Our second AT is the perspective of history and the challenging of the dominant perspective. In our own history, we can see ways in which people have attempted to defy the dominant narrative. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson ignored congressional opinions and proclaimed that he was, quote, born to rule. In response, an artist anonymously published a political cartoon that depicted Jackson as a monarch that was physically crushing and tearing apart the Constitution under his heel. The historical perspective on Andrew Jackson had been challenged since his time in office, but this cartoon at the time was calling out the perceived abuse of power, challenging the public narrative right then and there. In the sci-fi world, one such example of challenging the narrative from the media we watched came from the original BBC television series Doctor Who, specifically the episodes where the Daleks were introduced in 1964. In that episode, the Doctor and his companions come face to face with these highly intelligent, robot-like creatures who talked of the mutant Thals and how they needed to be confronted and defeated. However, when Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter, encounters the Thals, they appear as normal-looking people with an aversion to violence. Despite centuries of war, the Thals wish to challenge the Daleks' ancient perspective by making peace with the Daleks. The Daleks, on the other hand, are still determined to stick by their narrative of the Thals as dangerous mutants to justify the extermination of the Thals.
No attempt to capture them. They are to be exterminated. You understand? Exterminated. I understand.
Now with number 3, Jasmine.
AT-AT 3 is the dominating good standard or norms, and the trigger is challenging those standards or norms. Throughout history, we've seen standards of good passed on to help us function as a society. In certain cases, people must rebel or protest those norms because of a desired change. The U.S. was founded on protest and rebellion. From August 1786 to February 1787, Shays' Rebellion saw poor farmers and Revolutionary War veterans rebel against high taxes, heavy debt, and foreclosures. Today, if someone has debt, they can usually make a payment plan and pay it back over several months, often with interest. Making these payments can also help improve your credit score because it shows that you can repay what you owe. However, this was not the case for the people of Massachusetts, especially farmers. They did not have payment plans or many ways to get financial help. Their main choices were to pay their debts or risk being sent to prison. While people had a responsibility to pay their debts to the government, they also believed that they had the right to protest and rebel when the government laws and taxes seemed unfair and benefited the government more than the people. While the rebellion was crushed and many were harmed, it became a marketing point in history because not only did the Massachusetts pass debt relief laws, it also highlighted how weak the then Articles of Confederation were. A present demonstration of challenging norms is in the film Spider-Man: Brand New Day, where Peter Parker is tormented by the villain Jean Grey about not defying expectations and norms set upon him as a superhero after giving up everything he has just to keep everyone he loves safe. Jean Grey has questioned how his loyalty could be to those who were adamant in harming people like her. The government had created a means to silence anyone deemed out of line, similar to the way the people of Massachusetts were done by the government when wanting their issues to be resolved. Both Jean's torment and Peter's sense of belonging in a place where almost everyone only knows him as Spider-Man forced him into an identity crisis. He had to question whether he should remain consistent with the person he is and has always been, or rebel against the expectations placed upon him, even if doing so allows his powers to influence who he truly is. On to AT-AT 4 with Mar.
Our fourth AT-AT is the concept of the dominant class making choices for and or controlling the lower classes. In Andrew Hussey's webcomic, Homestuck, the alien society of Alternia has a socially oppressive caste system based on the color of one's blood. Each alien, or troll, has a specific blood color that deviates from the normal human blood color. This system works by dividing the blood hues into 3 distinct classes: high bloods, purples and pinks, mid bloods, blues and greens, and low bloods, yellows, oranges, and reds, as well as another lesser-known caste of mutants, those with blood colors that do not fit into these labels. Due to the societal unrest that this causes, they are killed on sight. The high blood types push and oppress the lower blood kinds, ranging from simply using offensive terms against them to full-blown genocide of mutants. Kinkri Vantis, referred to as a woke stereotype, is ironically a great example of how these themes can translate into real life. Oppressed and marginalized groups often have certain terms and labels thrust onto them. Kinkri makes this issue very apparent within the comic, often interrupting others to correct them on their bigotry. He makes a statement on the topic of blood castes, saying how royally blooded trolls have been able to use their tremendous lifespans over the millennia to gain a stranglehold over the social order, have been able to completely dictate our societal evolution by ensuring only their cultural agendas and narratives receive the dialogue's air supply, assuring the codification of those resilient ideas and deciding what normalcy entails. These themes can be seen in the human world as well. Oppressed groups often have unneeded labels pushed onto them, often with negative connotations. While Kinkri's activism doesn't affect the real world, he is actively risking his life while speaking out as an oppressed minority. Sharing a theme with Spider-Man: Brand New Day, Vantis is pushed to rebel against the forces which oppress him, even if that means doing it from the bottom of the social hierarchy. He takes matters into his own hands and speaks up against the apparent oppression he faces every day, paralleling many people in our own world who risk their lives daily for the betterment of society. Going back to the example of the American Revolution, when a nation is oppressed by systemic values forced upon them by a higher power, the nation has 2 options: to crumble under the pressure or to stand up against tyranny. No matter the outcome, these negative values are still seen reflected in our society to this day. Here again comes Jasmine with AT-AT number 5.
Pre-established social order and the disruption of existing social order is something we see in history and in sci-fi. A prime example of challenging a pre-established social order would be the fight for women's suffrage or any civil rights movement. Women's suffrage movement formally began in 1848, challenging the pre-established order that denied women political rights. This disruption to the dominant social order lasted 42 years and ended with the ratification of the 19th Amendment, prohibiting the denial of citizen rights to vote based on sex. We see a similar pattern in the 1927 German silent film Metropolis, with John and his son Frieder. Frieder consistently disrupts his father's social order by helping one of his father's employees, Josephat, who was fired and being sent to the underground to become a worker. Frieder's father is the ruler of this modern metropolis, but Frieder has seen the suffering of the workers who live underground, tolling on the machines that give the city people above their privileged life. Frieder defines the social order and switches places with an underground worker, assists Maria, who's leading a protest against the social order, and saves all the underground children from a certain death as a result of his father's plans to keep the machine going and the workers in line. Returning to AT-AT 6 is Jack.
Our sixth AT-AT theme focuses on the idea of the, quote, dominant public narrative, and how the narrative can be unraveled with an effective exposing of the manipulation behind the narrative. Within modern society, we see brave people trying to undermine the dominant narrative very frequently, and there is no better example of that than those who post videos surrounding the situation in Gaza in order to fight against the silencing and/or manipulation of information surrounding Gaza. While the American press has tried to paint the idea that the only deaths on either side of the conflict are soldiers, plenty of videos on platforms such as TikTok will inform viewers that many civilians from both Israel and Palestine have been made unfortunate victims of the fighting. On the topic of exposing lies, Elf Lathrop would have loved to have had TikTok as a tool in her fight to expose lies. In the 2025 film Wicked for Good, Elfa attempted to challenge the perspective that the people of Oz have of the wonderful wizard, and she does so by writing, quote, "Our wizard lies" in the clouds during Glinda's encouragement rally, hoping to expose the wizard's fraudulence. However, Madame Morrible quickly rewrites Elphaba's message to say, "Oz dies," convincing the crowd and keeping the dominant perspective that frames Elphaba as the Wicked Witch.
It's the Wicked Witch! Take cover! Linda! Take cover, everyone!
Finally, our last AT-AT with Abby.
Our seventh and final AT-AT is controlling social order and challenging that order through things like awareness, protesting, and demanding rights. Social order and the desire to keep things the way they are is a natural human condition. Those in power need to keep their power so that those without will keep working for them. The American Revolution is one of our biggest examples that tie into challenging social order. Leading up to the Revolution, colonists challenged their social order. For instance, when the British first taxed the colonists after the French and Indian War, colonists immediately started protesting. The most known example being the Boston Tea Party. England's response to that, to reclaim social order and authority, was to pass the Intolerable Acts. The colonists' response, again, was to protest, putting up flyers and demanding their rights as Englishmen. We can see instances of that in real life and media throughout the ages. For instance, our earlier example, Metropolis. Joe Fredersen caused, through his company, a figurative and a literal divide between these two classes. Though Frater challenges this social order, taking the place of a worker and working his shift, along with trying to help Josephat. On the other side of the coin, we can take the example of Secret Level, a 2024 series based on various video games. In Episode 9, The Outer Worlds, we are introduced to another dystopian industrial society. Our main character, Amos, works as a metal processing factory with his close friend Felicity. Felicity, eventually, gets a chance to intern as a scientist, leaving Amos all alone. Taking a chance to see his friend again, Amos gets a job as a test subject. When he finally runs into her, his body has been mangled by the tests and replaced by robotic parts. He's a fraction of a whole, due to the ignorant nature that Felicity allows to continue, even at times partaking in the torment of her closest friend. Felicity is given the chance to climb the ranks of their society, asking Amos for advice on what to do. She asks the simple question,
"Am I a bad person?"
You ain't a bad person, Felicity.
He doesn't think she's a bad person, despite all the pain she has allowed him to go through. Social order defines every person, whether they are aware of it or not. Amos gives in to Felicity, Frater challenges his father, Americans revolt. The way society treats people affects their reaction to daily life and asks them the question, can I keep living like this? Depending on the answer, you can have a carelessly peaceful society or the uprising of an entire nation. As kind of a grand finale, we're all back here together to talk about different topics and do a little discussion to discuss what we think about everything from our project. One of our first things is old sci-fi versus new sci-fi versus society. What are our thoughts and comments on relations to each other?
Well, I think I'll start off by saying that, personally, in my opinion, that old sci-fi and new sci-fi, there isn't much of a change in the writing, but more a change of what we see represented within it. If you look at, for example, old Doctor Who episodes, one that we watched about the Daleks and the Thals, the message and everything is the same as like a newer episode of Doctor Who, but in a newer episode of Doctor Who, the parts that wouldn't really matter about a character have been changed to matter. For example, letting the Doctor be a woman or letting the Doctor be somebody of a different race. It doesn't change anything about the story besides the fact that people are represented within it.
Good insight. I was going to say something similar, but I'll jump in here and say I think we as a society have just gotten wiser over the years. And so the things that we were seeing in, 1965, even 1927, we're just seeing it more clearly now, and that's why we think things have changed, quote unquote. But in reality, they haven't changed that much.
I wouldn't say it's changed, as both of them have said, but I think it's become easier to digest. I think sci-fi, as time has gone on, they've kind of, some have conformed to society standards and some haven't, as sci-fi usually doesn't do that anyways, as we've seen with Star Trek. But, for example, Spider-Man Brand New Day. That has taught us to accept that things are going to happen, bad things are going to happen to us, but it also teaches us to accept for what they are and try to move on and try to live happier lives. So I think sci-fi from the past has taught us to accept that there are going to be changes and differences in everyone and that we just have to accept that at some point. But also in the new sci-fi, we've been able to see like taking grief or taking anger or taking frustration out on others isn't going to help our society move forward. So I definitely think that sci-fi regardless has been very progressive in digesting the world into understanding basic moralic standards.
I totally agree. I think that sci-fi's main themes have not changed at all. I just think it's maybe different ways of taking a stance on everything. Like we can see from old X-Men to new X-Men. They've kind of stayed the same with their themes and such, just slightly different stories, you know?
Yeah, also to add on to that, you can also take the globalization of the world and how more connected we are, where we see more things from other cultures and we'll, label that as woke and new, whereas for, things like Metropolis in the 1927s, not many people saw that. Not many people it wasn't a very global thing, whereas now, if a new superhero movie comes out, it's translated into hundreds of languages. So more people are likely to see it, and more people are likely to project themselves onto it.
Speaking of woke as a label, as you've mentioned, another thing I wanted to ask was, what is your response to woke as a label in general?
I will butt in here. Kind of going off of what Jasmine said earlier, I think our response to the woke label kind of goes as follows. Either you're the person that's applying it, in which case you want to put it there for the reasons of you're trying to, downplay what you're seeing, or you're the person that's indulging in the wokeness and you feel silenced, shunned, shrunk a little. Thoughts?
Can I add on to that?
Yes, of course.
Okay. My response personally to the woke label is that it both has its negative connotations and its positive connotations. I definitely think woke has, in the same format as I had before, helped us digest information a lot easier rather than us just going all out and being angry at the said person. But it also can be used negatively when trying to talk about certain topics that aren't, I guess, normalized in everyday society. Like, for example, the LGBTQ community. Back in the 70s, back in the 60s, that wasn't normalized. So it'd be considered woke. It'd be considered, oh, yeah, you're being woke. You're trying to push this woke label onto us. But now it's normalized in our society, so we wouldn't think that it's woke. I think woke has always been there. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be existent no matter how long we live. But woke now, as it were back in the day, has become more easier to digest, easier to reconcile with, easier to be okay with, rather than just, like, it's scary. No, be afraid of it. It's communist. It's this.
Another thing that we can take into consideration with the word woke is how the English language tends to have double meanings for nearly every word. Take the word smell, for example. Something can smell like fresh-baked cookies, or something can smell like a rotting carcass. The word is smell still, but the context of which it's used depends on your reaction to it. So if you're, for example, somebody sees a pride parade and goes, oh my gosh, I'm so glad people are being woke in our community, that would be taken as something good. Whereas somebody could see the same pride parade and go, oh my god, there's people being woke in our community. Same words, different context. It all depends on how it's used.
100%, because I know for most of us, we think woke is a good thing. This was a topic we kind of talked about in the beginning. But a lot of other people see woke as a bad thing, as mentioned earlier in the podcast. They have a negative annotation to what that means, which kind of leads into our main point. What's the glitch in all of this?
So my interpretation probably isn't right, but my glitch for me is the shift in society where we went from accepting things that are progressive, things that are new, and to the point where we are no longer accepting these things because they've grown. Like Jasmine said, woke things have become easier to digest, but they're harder pills to swallow. So, in a sense, it's only easier to digest once you've gotten it down, and people are refusing to do that.
I think the glitch is something revolutionary. It's pretty much something that disrupts our everyday normal life, both good and bad, because even if you do get disturbed in everyday life doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. But I think the glitch is wokeness, pretty much. Wokeness can disturb our everyday lives, but it also can be a part of our normal day lives. Like, for example, being on social media, you will see a lot of woke things. That won't necessarily disturb your life because it's pretty much everything you see every single day. But one day you might see something that's considered woke in your life, and that may cause a disturbance into your life. So I think a glitch is just something that pauses you for a second. It doesn't stop you from what you're doing. It doesn't stop you from the life that you're living. It just disrupts it just a little bit. It makes you feel uncomfortable, but that depends on how you react to it.
I agree with that. Adding on to it, the simulation part of the glitch in the simulation is how society expects you to think about things, how going with the grain, and the common dominant way of thinking. The glitch is opening your eyes and seeing that there is more than that, whether that be radical on either side or whichever way it sways. The glitch is straying from what people expect of you. And I think that kind of encapsulates woke as a whole, where the reason why woke is such a big issue is because people react to it. There's not that much change, but they're finding reason to be upset about it because it's different from the narrative that they have had their entire life.
I think that's a really great point, Mar, and I think it ties together to our main idea, because what is the glitch? It's when did the woke label appear in sci-fi? And I think we kind of all agreed that it's always been there. And it's not just in sci-fi, it's everywhere if you look close enough. It's just that sci-fi is the perfect media for this to come to light with all of us. And we all also came together and agreed on one main statement that I think really described well our thoughts. And it's, when triggered certain themes, the woke glitch shifts the label that people project onto sci-fi from being a progressive alternative reality to a threat to their reality. A glitch in their simulation. And really, it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. If people take newness as something that's an attack, they're going to constantly feel that their sense of reality is shifting when the, I guess, real reality of it is that not much changes when other people get time in the spotlight. Just because you're not on main screen 24/7 does not mean that you aren't included.
Well, I think we all have our thoughts out on the table, and I'm so happy we all got to do this together.
Yeah.
So, that is our Glitch in the Matrix podcast with our SOfIA group, and I hope it was fun.
Yay!
Yay! Thank you for watching.
Or listening.
My bad. This podcast was a production of the A Glitch in the Matrix SOfIA group. Jasmine Glover, Jack Snyder, Abby Van Zee, and Mara Walker. Directed by our student mentor, Rotiera Smith. Produced by our faculty advisors, Chris Goebel and Shweta Arpit Shrivastava. This podcast was produced with the support of Monmouth College and WPFS Radio. The clips and quotes in this show are used under fair use for commentary and review only. All other rights reserved.